You can tell a lot about a person from the books that they read. Books have the ability to change our worlds by challenging our perceptions or take us to new worlds altogether. On this week's episode of the Infusion Breakdown Show, the Breakdown crew sat down with two very special guests. Brand new guest, Tim Beehler from the Attention Collection podcast, as well as returning guest, Lamar Johnson, to discuss the most influential books that we've ever read. Let's see what we came up with. Before we get started on today's episode, I'd like to introduce to you our Black-owned Business of the Week, where we showcase quality Black-owned businesses for you to support every week. This week's business is Pig and Brew Barbecue Restaurant Bar, located in the heart of Richmond, Virginia, owned by one of today's guests, Lamar Johnson. Pig and Brew is home to authentic North Carolina-style barbecue and is a great place to grab a drink during their happy hour, which will be returning soon. Be sure to check them out if you're in the 804.
So today's question is going to be, what's the most impactful book you've read?
So I went through a phase where I was reading a ton of books, and I've slowed down recently, but there's one book that I've gone back to, 10 times probably, maybe more than that. It's a short read, it's a quick read, but I keep going back to it. It's called The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, if you're familiar. But it is a book that really changed how I see the world in terms of free will, cause and effect, and it's really shaped, my approach to a lot of things. So I don't know what kind of detail you want me to go into, but that is for sure, for me, a life changer at this point.
How exactly did that impact you?
It made me rethink just so many different things. So I don't think it's his point in this book that we don't have free will, or that free will is more of an illusion. I think that's what he's trying to get across. That's not the point of the book, but that's kind of the basis of what he talks about, is how we've kind of lost free will throughout our lives. And so it just kind of makes me think about decision making, choices, the choices that other people make, how everybody's choice is constrained in some way or another. Some extremely constrained, some moderately less constrained, but every choice is constrained by the history that's happened before us, by the reality of nature, just things you can't do, like you can't fly, you can't get 5 years younger. Like, so you might say, well, that's kind of a trite example of free will, but it's it's a natural effect of it. So
correct.
When it's helped me look at decisions differently, other people's decisions too, and have a lot of more grace for how people come to their decision making process, the things that they actually do. Like, look at not the decision itself solely, but what's the background of that? What's the context to that? Like, what happened that brought this person to that decision, good or bad? Mm-hmm. But I think there's a lot more layer there that I've kind of adopted from thinking about life this way.
Now, was this a book that you encountered just by happenstance, or something that you intentionally sought out to challenge that perception that you had?
No, it was just by happenstance. I forget. I read a couple of books by C.S. Lewis, and then I think my wife bought me like this collection of like 5 short books of his, and it just was one of those books. I mean, it's a quick read. It's like 150 pages or something like that, 120 pages, but it's just packed. It's packed for me. So
I think you had me sold on that. I think I'm going to use that for my free book voucher on Audible for the next month. I got a few of those stored up now.
It's a good one. I like it.
What about you, Lamar?
I'll say DeVon Franklin, Truth About Men. He's a pastor. He's married to Megan Good. I like the book. Well, I'm not gonna say I like it. I love the book because I have an issue with fighting the inner dog in me with females. Some people say I'm a nympho or whatever you want to call it, but it made me understand why I could be in that predicament, or why am I challenging myself to do that. Mm-hmm. It has got me disciplined enough to control the urge of messing with different women or having multiple sexual partners and stuff like that. So, and then it also taught me a lot of life lessons about just how they're dealing with broken women and a broken self as well.
Now, same question that I asked Tim. Was that something that you intentionally sought out, or something that was that you just came across?
I follow DeVon Franklin on Instagram, so it's kind of pretty, like, you know, you see the advertisements all the time, and then I just went from there.
Josh, have any of you heard of DeVon Franklin? Or, like, this is my first introduction to him.
He's the he's from I think it's Empire. Have you ever seen Empire? The show with like Terrence Howard.
I know what it is though.
I think he's one of the people from up there. But yeah,
He's one of the brothers.
Yeah,
he's the older brother.
Yeah.
No, he's not the older brother. The older brother's actor is I forgot his name, but no, he's executive producer of a lot of movies and stuff like that as well. He's in Hollywood, but I haven't seen him in any movies that I can think of. But I know he's an executive producer of multiple movies. I know the movie that Megan Good was just in, like the little Stalker movie. He was one of the executive producers for that. But other than that, I just know him as being a pastor.
Lamar, I know you were saying like how it's affected you. What would you say? What's like the premise of the book? Like what's his position?
His position is, you know, the truth about men. So it's like the underlying factors and the stereotypical stuff that women say about men, but then it's like breaking it down for why the woman thinks like that. Then it's not one-sided. It shows why the woman thinks like that, why the man thinks like that, and how to fix those issues on both hands.
One interesting thing before we get too deep into the book conversation is, so with the attention collection, there's one particular post that you guys had about reading books. So with the advent of Zoom meetings and everyone doing interviews like that now that we're in a COVID era, and you see everyone doing interviews and they have these big bookshelves, I mean, with the exception of us, but they have bookshelves behind them, people trying to like pick and see what like book the people are reading. And it's one thing important to note that even if you read the same book as someone else, you're not gonna have the same experience. And I think you guys summed it up beautifully.
Yeah, that's something Anthony always talks about, you know, like, cause we never, even like this, like we don't come to the same conversation the same way, you know, we can listen to the same song, watch the same movie, like, but it's all filtered, you know, through our experience, through our life, and through our perspective, and, you know, through the things that we actually hear, you know. I mean, I read a book and forgot an entire chapter, you know, by the end of it, but that might have been the most impacting chapter to somebody else. So it's just kind of what we remember, how we filter, all that kind of stuff.
Right, your placement in life has to do a lot with that too, I imagine.
Yeah,
and how receptive you are to the material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. I've reread books, you know, years later. One of my favorite movies of all time, I actually walked out of the movie theater when it first came out. I had no idea what was going on, man. I was so lost. And then like I watched it like 5 years later. I was like, this is the best movie I've ever seen. So yeah, it's funny when you catch things at different places in your life, different times, for sure, have an effect on you.
Absolutely. That's why I kind of like to revisit books that I consider some of my favorites over time, just because I'm in a different place in life and something else may stand up to me. So I'm going to transition to my candidate for the most impactful book that I've read. And I would undoubtedly, like, if you know me, it's probably no secret, it's going to be The 12 Rules of Life, An Antidote to Chaos by Dr. Jordan Peterson, who is a clinical psychologist, and he's also a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. And the overarching theme of the book is he's prescribing responsibility as the antidote. And there's a direct correlation between responsibility and meaning, which is exactly how I found the book. I was in a period of my life where I was struggling to find meaning and purpose. And I came across his 13-part series on the book of Genesis, where he broke down different biblical stories and explained the psychological significance and the symbolism in those as well. And it was just mind-blowing. Like, these are 2-3 hour lectures that he's giving, and I was just captivated. And then so from there I began to explore other of his material, and then ultimately picking up 12 Rules for Life. And it's, like I said, it was the most transformative book that I've read. And to summarize the book up briefly, it is a pragmatic way of recognizing our own capacity and complicity for malevolence in the world. And so there's 3 overarching ways that really explained itself to me, or that I found to be really impactful. So one of those is our capacity for resentment under the guise of virtue. So doing things that we masquerade as being the correct thing to do, but we're actually doing it for a malicious reason, or to get back at someone or a group of people. our compliance via sins of omission. So by not doing things that's not a it's not a way of getting rid of your responsibility. And then also the consequence of speaking things that we know not to be true. And all three of those examples have played themselves out over the course of history, because if you look at anything within Soviet Russia, which he references a lot throughout the book, or any of these fascist regimes, a lot of these things they start on the backs of small lies that cascade, because people don't take responsibility in the immediate situation and speak up, and then it gets out of hand, and then it's to the point where no one can control it. So from that path of self-discovery, when I read that book, it was pretty much a wake-up call in terms of taking responsibility for my own life. Not saying that I was completely irresponsible whatsoever, but I was tired of being the author of my own misery. So I took that into my own hands and was thinking, like, the first major paradigm shift is, what could I do differently? And just throughout the different chapters, like there's 12 of them obviously, but they sound like very, very practical. But the way he explains them, being a clinical psychologist, it really breaks it down in different scenarios, and really resonates with you. So there's stand up straight with your shoulders back, treat yourself like someone you're responsible for helping, make friends with somebody who wants the best for you, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Pursue virtue, pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Assume the person you're listening to might know something that you don't. Sorry, I messed that up. Be precise in your speech. Do not bother children while they're skateboarding, and pet a cat on the street. Or excuse me, pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. And like those just from those the titles of the chapters, they sound really surface level and non-consequential, but if you actually think about the underlying concepts, I feel like that's something that anyone can read any one of those chapters and take something away from.
It's interesting. You're talking about the three things at the beginning. It kind of made me think of Socrates' rule of three. Like, is it true? Is it useful? Is it kind? Right? Like this filter of checking down before you're going to share information, or before you're going to, approach somebody about something. Like going through that process of kicking it around in your mind. Is what I'm about to tell them absolutely true, or at least as true as I can, feasibly make it? And is it useful to them? Is it even helpful? And at the end, is it kind?
Right. We kind of touched on that on a previous episode. It was entitled, Is It Ever Okay to Lie? Because lying and withholding information, you kind of walk that fine line between, is this actually deceptive of somebody intentionally, or is this something that I can just get away by omitting information? And so I guess you actually drew out Socrates, which we failed to bring out, but that's a really big, I'm glad you tied that in. I'm gonna have to go back and watch our own episode again. What about you guys?
You wanted to go, Des?
Yeah, I'll clear it up. So I was actually wrong. He's not the dude from Empire, just in case if we have any Empire fans watching it. Him and the dude that I was actually mistaken with, they are like doppelgangers. They look exactly alike, but they're not related. But bring everything back full circle. The book I chose is actually a book that I probably mentioned close to around this time last year, and it's called Unfuck Yourself. This is a book that my mom had got me. I don't know. I think it was for my 23rd birthday. It was a book that I sat on for a while, because for whatever reason I'll buy a book and I'll sit on it for a little bit, and then when I feel like I'm in the right mind frame to read it, I just naturally gravitate back towards it. But of course, she bought it and she said to me, "This is a book that I think people of your generation need to read." She said it like in a very playful manner, but it was actually very, very truthful. And the one lesson that I took from this book is to stop criticizing and beating yourself up over your flaws. And what I mean by that is Gary John Bishop, what he does in the book is he says, if you ever look at yourself in a relationship and you always think that you're excellent, or if you think that you're going to ruin the relationship, then what's likely going to happen is you're going to ruin the relationship. So instead of consistently thinking that way, acknowledge that you are good at that. And then once you acknowledge the good, it's like reverse psychology. Okay, I acknowledge what I'm actually good at. and how I can take that information and that data and then apply the remedy to where it no longer affects me in that way. And one of the things that I noticed with self-help books is you kind of naturally apply them to your life. And so I know, for example, like this was something very, 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 very elementary, but it was like the beginning of me applying what I was reading in this book. Was like, man, you know, I live 45 minutes away from the office in downtown Norfolk. I'm always a few minutes late. Instead of always beating myself up about being late, knowing that it could be, you know, it could lead to disciplinary action. It's like, damn, you know, I'm actually really good at being late. Like when I think back, not even just work, when I think back to college, I was late to class. When I think back to high school, you know, I had ISS numerous times because my tardies just racked up. I was like, damn, this is actually something I'm really good at. And then that allows me to sit down and say, okay, now why am I always consistently late? And then I can go in, I can look at, okay, well, you know, that 15 minutes of sleep cost me 2 minutes. You know, that 2 minutes I spent letting the car warm up when I could have just got in and gone. That 2 minutes was would have been the bridge lift, because I have to cross 2 bridges just to get to work. Like it was just thinking of things like that. Like what can I actually do to, you know, I mean, be the catalyst for change in my life. And I think as I kind of just read this book and applied it more and more, it got me out of my mind. I'm very, very overcritical of myself. I'm an overthinker to the true definition of it. And I think after reading this book, it kind of allowed me to forgive myself for being human. It allowed me to forgive other people for being human and to stop holding them up to this, you know, this golden standard or this expectation that they haven't necessarily achieved themselves. Like a lot of people, they'll look at me, for example, in the relationship that I have with my son's mother, and it would be very, very uncommon because we're actually better friends now than what we were when we were actually in a relationship. And this book is a big part of it because it allowed me to forgive people without having to hear the words "I'm sorry." Because oftentimes people don't know what they're truly sorry for because they haven't done the analysis and the overlooking and the overhaul that I did, you know, as a testament to this book to become better at, you know, what I was previously bad at, or become even better at what I was bad at. Whatever way you twist it.
How would you compare that book if you've read this one? Because they're typically in the same vein. I hear them in the same conversation. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
So funny you mentioned that. I was this close to getting this book because I had kind of a couple of my managers at work, they had read it, and when I was reading this book, they were like, "Oh, you definitely love The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck." But they were saying it because they were exactly similar. So I remember I had won something at work, and I had to choose between Aisha Curry's cookbook and The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
And you went with the cookbook.
I went with the cookbook, man, because it was just at that point, because we had the conversation on the podcast as well. If you look back at a previous episode, I think it was one where we had with is her name? What? It's not Elaine, is it?
We had Emmett and Leanne.
Leanne, yeah. And I kind of mentioned in that book, I was like, you know, there comes a point where you've read too many self-help books. Like you haven't truly taken the book and applied it to your life. You're now just reading these books to obtain pointless data. So I didn't get it for that reason. But it is one of the books that I will read at some point when I feel like it's time for me to read it. But at that time, I really wasn't feeling the need to get it. But it is on the watch list at some point.
I can definitely tell you it's worth the read. I don't know if Josh, Lamar, or Tim, have you read it? And you guys?
I wrote that one down.
I downloaded it. I have it on my Audible, but I haven't read it yet or listened to it yet.
Like I think
you brought something up there that I don't know. I was kind of feeling myself, and I've scaled back because of you. You know, you're saying it's just one more book, right? It's just one more data point. Like at some point, you know, and I read for years. I read 60 or 70 books, and just one on top of another, and when I got done, I was like, I remember, like, for example, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I've read it. I don't remember anything about it. I remember I enjoyed it. Like, I remember there were points in it that I was like, oh yeah, it's only been a year or 2 years. I have zero recollection. Because as soon as it was done, I picked up another one, and so, you know, you get like in the moment where you're kind of like, oh yeah, that's good. I need to, but at some point you need to like give yourself some of that space to, like you said, you go read a cookbook, read something else, like listen to some music for a while. Like, just give yourself some space, processing things. So, I think that's huge.
I think something that helps with that, instead of like the mindset of reading for completion, is to adopt what the religious people do that attend church regularly and read the Bible. So if you look at it, the Bible has not changed in the past, I don't know how many years. Okay, let's just say over the past few centuries, the Bible has not changed. It's the same book, but people still go to church every Sunday and they're still reading the scriptures. Why? Because to a degree, it's a living document. It's a living book, piece of literature. Because no matter what point you are in your life, it still applies. So if you revisit it and you're going through and reading it and assessing the same verse that you read 5 years ago, and then you hear the pastor preach on it, and then you revisit it again 3 years later, something like that. It's cyclical. They discuss the same information, but it's through that repetition and revisiting it. And then also another thing I've noticed with church groups is the concept of Bible study. So by processing a few scriptures, like they may only have six verses that they read a night, and then they'll stop and they'll talk about it, they'll discuss that. So applying that same ideology to the way we read normal books, I think it allows the actual material to be absorbed a little better for comprehension, and then also having discussions with people, kind of like what we're doing now, and to tie the information in with our personal experiences, and it actually becomes something, rather than just words that you're parsing for little snippets to check off as a box saying completed this, I finished this book.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. You guys should start doing book studies.
I'm down for it. I think Desmond had mentioned a long time ago one book that I've heard the name of it. I know it's a pretty widely recognized book, The Alchemist. And I think that you may have. Did you ask Anthony about that when he was on?
I might have.
You asked one of our guests about The Alchemist, and it's like that's one thing that I do want to read, but it's one of the lower priorities items on my list. But before the end of the year, I definitely want to read that one.
Yeah, no, I even said I was going to get it for you guys, and thank you for bringing it back up, because now I can add that to my short list of to-do.
Yeah, that was a great book. That's another short read, but like really powerful.
Super short read, and everybody that I've either given it to, like let them borrow it or talk to them about, they always say the first read they don't understand anything and they have to read it again. I was like, yeah, that's how it was for me too. I had to read it twice before I could actually understand what was going on in the book.
Yeah, it's like a long form parable.
Tim, are you talking?
What's that?
I couldn't hear like the first half of what you were just saying.
Oh, you got me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just saying it's like a long form kind of like parable, to some degree. It's like just the way it's presented. Yeah, but I agree with you on the first read. You're kind of getting your bearings, because it's not told like the normal story that you're expecting, and then you get done, you're like, oh, that was good. I think I need to read that again.
Josh, what'd you come up with?
Let's see. The book I would say impacted me the most lately, I would say, has been like Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. I would say that book has really helped me look at spending money differently, I would say. I was never like huge on spending money on clothes or shoes or anything like that, but I still didn't have like the proper knowledge to know what to spend my money on. Like in college, I had plenty of money through reimbursements, but I never like invested my money so I could have my money work for me. And that's really what he talks about a lot in the book, like having your money work for you. And he mentions how the middle class and poor people work for money while rich people have money work for them. And they do that by investing in stocks and spending their money on assets rather than spending their money on liabilities, which essentially is what poor people, or really what poor people in the middle class really does, just spend their money on liabilities. And a part of that is people thinking that their homes is an asset when it's really a liability. And what I say by a liability is anything that takes money out of your pocket, while an asset is anything that puts money in your pocket. So poor and middle class liabilities usually include like a new car with a new note, spending money on clothes, or any type of debt, basically. And we talked about this a little bit before, but a lot of times people buy Benz when they can't necessarily afford it, or the clothes or the shoes just to look rich. And rich people know actually investing in assets actually helps them become wealthy rather than actually looking the part, really. So that was definitely a big thing that helped me reevaluate how exactly how I was spending my money. because it really adds up, and it really doesn't have to. He also talks about like why people stay at their jobs and don't actually do things like start their own business, because essentially you're helping your employer get rich instead of helping yourself get rich, really. And then that comes with like financial literacy, I think he said, like financial literacy or financial knowledge or something like that. He said, which is what help people, which is what a lot of people lack, really, that financial literacy or knowledge. So yeah, that's really my book, really, I would say. I'm not all the way done with it though. I'm more than halfway done, but I would say that's my book though.
Is that why you texted me like 2 weeks ago and asked if me reading, well, I think you had thought that I had mentioned Rich Dad, Poor Dad instead of Rich Kid, Poor Kid, but is that why you asked if I was still going to go to law school?
Yeah, that's why I asked. But you was like, you didn't read the books. I was like, I thought you mentioned that book though. So I was like, I thought you read that book. Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, the book that I have is Rich Kid, Poor Kid, and I was actually going to name that book, but I had already gave a little bit of a synopsis on it a few episodes back. But yeah, man, like that would probably be the immediate read after Between the World and Me, just because I want to piece everything together. Like, how did Rich Dad, Poor Dad birth Rich Kid, Poor Kid? Like how they're intertwined together.
Yeah, it's really dope. Like, I know I don't want to give too much away, but in the beginning of the book, he tells how he was a kid, how he was a kid with his friend. He was like, he lived in a part of a town where he was with rich kids in the rich school and everything like that, but he wasn't considered rich himself. So when he was him and his friend was trying to go on a trip with one of the rich kids, he was like, yeah, you guys can't go with us because you guys aren't rich. And then he asked his dad, he was like, wait, what does that mean? Like, why aren't we rich, or what does that mean? So he's like, and then that's basically how it started, him seeking that. And it's pretty entertaining. I would say that, yeah. It's definitely entertaining.
That's a great
read. You had the Audible, it'll take 50 minutes to read.
Oh yeah,
I probably done read it 50 times.
I'm glad you bring that up though, Josh, because that's a book I don't know. I have this problem where like a book is hot, I don't want to read it. But like everybody's talking about it, I'm like, okay, it's probably crap because everybody loves it. But when I meet somebody that talks about it, like shares that, then I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. I want to read that book now. Because it was one of those ones that's like, how could you not have read that book, right? Like in my mind, like, how could I not have read this book? Everybody has read this book, but I've had this resistance, but I need that barrier broke down, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's really uplifting, and you get a lot of stuff from it, especially like, oh wait, what was I spending my money on, and was that actually putting money in my pocket, or was it really just taking money out of my pocket? Like, yeah. So, and I like when I was just sitting in bed just reading a book, and I just stopped, looked around my room, and looked at my Jordans I don't really wear like that, and I was like, God damn.
liability.
Exactly. But yeah.
No question for you, Josh. I know Desmond has spoke in past about his investing in Forex, and then I know myself, I do stock, and I know Lamar as well. He has a stock portfolio. Tim, I'm uncertain
why. The podcast we did with Lamar is the reason why, like, I actually got my feet wet with Forex, and then, of course, after that, everything snowballed with me just picking up bits of data, and it became this bigger ordeal. So yeah,
Tim,
formally, thank you for enlightening me on that, since I never reached out and said thank you.
You're welcome, man.
But you was gonna say, was I doing stocks?
No, I'm saying after you started reading the book, have you started investing yourself now?
Oh yeah, I have. But the thing is, and I actually, because one thing I asked Desmond too, like, what app did he use for trading? And he actually told me like all the other apps. He's like, oh yeah, we got this, and we got Robinhood. But I already knew about Robinhood. That's really the only one I actually knew about. And I actually have been investing since 2018. But I actually like stopped, and I was like, I actually forgot about it because my sister introduced me to the app and everything, Robinhood, like early 2018. I like got invested in stock and everything like that. But I like deleted the app and like wasn't even looking at the app. And then she asked me about it, like, I'm gonna say 2 months ago, and she was like, have you been looking at the app? And I was like, oh, not really. And then I re-downloaded it, and turned out I made like $100-something in like a year. It was, it's wild. So, yeah. So, but yeah, I've been doing way more investing now though. that's definitely a main component, though.
I'm happy to hear that. It's Robinhood is super helpful, especially like when I first started investing. But there's a perception of Robinhood investors as being dumb investors because they rely on people who are it's like the barrier for entry. So they come in there with the mindset that they just want to learn investing, and they'll hear about a trend and then they'll pump a bunch of money into it. The value will rise, and the people who are smart have done their research. They know when to pull their money out, and so the people who are just starting with Robinhood, they'll take losses. But I feel like if you have like, there's nothing wrong with Robinhood, like I was saying. Like if you start off with that, or if you're using that and you happen to supplement that with actually like reading articles about the companies and doing research, and there's so many financial resources. I know that like Earn Your Leisure is a really big one that I've gotten into recently. Like watching their podcast, they have a session on Monday, then Tuesday, and then they have like Wall Street Trapper. He's another guy who's been a guest on there. He has sessions on Tuesdays. I know Lamar's familiar with those guys. I don't know if you guys have heard of them before.
Oh yeah, Mark Monroe. I'm in Mark Monroe's program. I'm in this. It's a 13-year-old guy. I'm in his program. We do a lot of trade options. He actually took $2,000 of trade option on Tesla in May, and then by July he made $75,000. So trust me.
Wasn't he just a guest on Earn Your Leisure?
Yeah, he was a guest probably like 3 weeks ago after he already made the money, but he was giving out that game as soon as Tesla hit 300 in March after the pandemic hit. So, and you know, he's giving out a lot of free games. So if you guys really want to make some serious capital, you know how I am about financial literacy. I hate 401ks. I hate IRAs. I hate all those. They're the worst things in the world. Believe me. You could really take $2,000 to $3,000, if less, and you could kill your 401k and retire literally. Because they were doing like simulations. If you just put $1,000 in Apple in 2000, you'll be worth $8 million in stock right now. That's including dividends and everything. So, I mean, the split is ready to come up for Tesla and Apple. It's gonna change the game.
It already took action because I previously owned shares of Apple, and I checked yesterday. I knew it was gonna officially go into effect on tomorrow, but my shares have already quadrupled because of the split. So right now, if you haven't already invested in Apple or Tesla, I'm not going to tell you go ahead and do that.
The official split company, because you know they're going to have basically a Tesla A, Tesla B, like they have Google A, Google B. That's what it's going to be. But I like to do ETFs, which is futures. It's more simpler. You can invest in all those companies in one, and your dividends could be 14-15% a week easily. I know some people that are already ETFs in 1 month is like 144%. So,
Tim, have you ever looked into investing, or do you currently invest?
Yeah, I would say, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago now. I did, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dave Ramsey. I did his program to get out of debt, and it worked really well for me. And from that point on, I was kind of really interested in finances. And I had an opportunity while I was doing my master's degree to be the office manager for a financial advisor for about 3 years. So I got a pretty decent education on that, and been investing ever since. I had a 401k from the company I was working with, and then when I switched jobs, I was able to roll it into just regular any stocks that I wanted. So I've been doing that now for 7-8 years or something like that. You know, my wife gets some of those at my wife has done a great job at U of M Hospital, and they do a 401k there that you can't opt out of. It just is what it is, but they pay into it every month, and they match. They do a salary match there, so that's been blowing up. She's been there for 12 years now or something, but that's money that is free money because they're matching for us. So with my investments in that, it's been an interesting ride. You know, I think as with anybody, I made a ton of mistakes. You know, I've made enough good ones. There's a poker player I used to follow because the way he thought about life. Eric Lundgren was his name, but he always used to say, it's more important to not lose the big hand than it is to win the big hand. And I've always kind of taken that in. I'm probably a little more conservative, but I was young enough, so moderately young enough, but I was young enough that, you know, I could lose a couple big hands early on. As I'm getting ready to crest 40 here, I'm trying to think about, you know, being a little more conservative on that end, because you ain't got quite as much time to catch up after that. So, you know, shifting some of those things.
Pretty neat. I'd never heard of him. I thought you were gonna say, what's the guy with the beard and his last name starts with a B?
Oh, which one? A poker player?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were gonna talk about.
Oh, yeah. I don't remember how I got on it. Oh, you know what? I think I liked. I forgot how I think I watched one World Series of Poker like really early on. You know, like when it just got big and it was on TV, and I was playing a lot of poker and watching these guys, and I forgot. I think I happened to watch the tournament that Eric Lundgren won, and so I was like, oh, I want to see it. So he had a book out, and I read his book, and it was, you know, he's an interesting guy, but he had a lot of great thoughts in there, and that was one that always kind of stuck out with me, especially playing poker. But you know, with life too. I mean, what I forget what the psychological thing is, but you are more affected by loss than you are by gain. You'd have to have double gain to compensate for loss. So, for example, if you lost $10, to get that much, the amount of pain you feel at losing $10, to get the opposite amount of pleasure, you'd have to get at least $20. If that makes sense, you know,
Yeah.
Explain that right. So, at the emotional level. So we're built for like being affected more by pain, and I think that's kind of a biological thing to keep us safe, certainly, right? You know, if you go back to evolution, right? But it plays out in so many different realms here. It's not that you shouldn't take risks, but calculate the risk, right? Because pain points just affect us psychologically way more than gain does, at least in kind.
That makes a lot of sense when you say, like, if you lose 20, if you lose 10, you have to gain 20 to make that up. Because if you think about it, if you just gain 10, you're back at base level. So it's like, I was already here, I should expect that. I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. And it's really easy to illustrate that when you put it in financial terms. But one thing that you were just talking about was calculated risk, which is another concept from 12 Rules of Life, where we talk about the relationship between, I don't talk about it, it's not my book. But Jordan Peterson, he talks about the relationship between chaos and order. And so ideally, you don't want to be entirely on one side or the other. You kind of want to have one foot in order to where you have stability and you're able to regulate things. And then you also want to have one foot in chaos, because that's where you're experiencing new things and you're learning about the world around you and taking in new information. And so now that I'm this is one of the reasons I really want to do this episode, was because across different books and different experiences that we have, I kind of like see an underlying theme that runs through all these different forms of literature. And then even what you were just saying about the poker players quote, and then about calculated risk. But like on the topic of recommending books, I think Anthony from the Attention Collection, I don't know whether it was him who said it or whether it was you, Tim, but from the Attention Collection, it originated there. The idea that you're a little hesitant to recommend books to people, just for the fact that it's actually, I think you could do a better job of explaining that, but are you familiar with what I'm referencing, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it like advice, you know, it's the same thing. Like it can be dangerous, you know, take this on my recommendation, right? Well, I don't know what place you're in right now, you know, mentally, I don't know what place you're in right now in your life. I don't even know what you truly believe, right? Even if we talk all the time, right? So I might be, you know, this thing might have just blown up my life, and you could read it and just have like this really, you know, strange effect to it. So it's one of those things where you can recommend a book, but I always try to say, like, this is how it impacted me. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it'll do this for you, you know, like, this is what it's about. You know, I try to give as much, because it's another thing, like, you start reading a book, especially, especially if someone you like recommended it. I've done this so many times. You're like, I'm gonna get through this book because they recommended it, and I get through the book, and I'm like, this book is trash, man. And not only did I just waste my life, but like I don't even know what's going on, you know. Like, and then so now I have this weird relationship with them. Like, dude, you recommended me a terrible book.
Start questioning the friendship.
Yeah, but I mean, it's easy to throw those things out, but a lot of times we don't think about, especially books that are like really deep, like that really play with your worldview. You know, sometimes the person's not ready for that, and that doesn't make you smarter or better. You're just in a different spot on that part of your journey or whatever. But you can give to somebody could really blow up their worldview, you know. So funny enough, you brought it up earlier. I'm actually a pastor, and I brought up a lot of books that I don't read strictly Christianity, anything hardly, and I hate a lot of Christian books. I think they're terrible. But I read books that challenge a lot of that stuff. I read a lot of books about evolution and psychology, but I don't recommend those lightly to people in my congregation because I'm not ready to blow up somebody's faith just because I'm at a different place in it versus them, you know. And so I think about that, very carefully when you recommend something to somebody. You can try to consider where they're at, and if this would actually be a good book for them, would this be helpful for them based on what you know. I mean, obviously don't know them all the way, but something to consider.
Do you read that? Do you read those books because you just want to see another point of view, or do you like doubt like what you do or something? Like another evolution book, yeah.
No, I just believe in truth, and I believe that truth is truth, and it doesn't matter who said it, or whatever. It's got its way through. So, and I think the other thing about it is, I think you can get really tunnel vision inside any belief, and the more tunnel vision you get, the smaller your tunnel vision gets, and you forget that there's perspective out there, and there's more to it. There's no book you can read. There's no thing you can do that's going to have the fullness of truth. There's just more, right? That's just the reality of life. You can't read the Bible and know all about God. You can't read the Bible 20 times and know all about God, because God's bigger than that, and life is bigger than that. So you need these perspectives. You need questions being asked, So I try to read a little bit of everything and try to be as open as I possibly can be, and consider it all, be a little critical if I can.
And it definitely helps when you're having conversations with people on the opposing side, or people, I guess, within your congregation who are having these questions. You can kind of answer them, as opposed to just saying, oh, this is what the Bible says, this is what the Bible says, and just completely ignore the evidence that they're citing to support the argument. Because I feel like that's a lot of people's experience when they have those kind of questions. Like there was a point in time about 2 years ago when I was going to a Bible study, and I was asking questions and I was citing evidence of evolution with specific examples, and they were like, yeah, we know, but just completely disregarding it. So that was frustrating for me, because they were being willful, like in their quote unquote ignorance, just by the definition of just brushing that to the side and discounting what I had just cited, or when I was asking questions, they weren't able to give me sufficient answers, what frustrated me.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, because that statement, this is what the Bible says, is not so much, hey, let me tell you what the Bible says. This is the perspective of the Bible. It's more like, this is what the Bible says, so that's the end of it.
Yeah.
It's not a conversation anymore. I'm
no.
going to let you know that you're wrong and this is right. So yeah, I hate that phrase. I hate that phrase so much. I think a better phrase is, this is where it says it in the Bible, as opposed to the Bible says this, because the Bible even shows a progression of thought, a progression of understanding. So you might say, at this part of the Bible, it talks about it like this. At this part about the Bible, it talks about it like that. And then there's a bigger conversation there. So
right.
Yeah, I hate that phrase, man. That's bad.
Like stifling conversation that like it just being very matter of fact is almost like the classic argument we all experience, where the parent will say do something and you ask as a child because you want the understanding, and they say, oh, just because I'm the parent, and it doesn't leave any room for growth at that point in time, and it's kind of like a sense of unfulfillment, because you definitely don't have what you were seeking, and that was a potential that you could have grasped and had growth.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if God is truth, as people will say, so God embodies truth or whatever, then God can handle it. God's got the big boy pants on, right? He can handle you searching for truth if God is truth, right? Because you're ultimately gonna be led back to that place at some point. So it's not like, I don't think questioning destroys faith. I think not questioning destroys faith, to be honest with you, because when you don't question, you say I know, and faith is the exact opposite of knowing, right? Faith is based on things you don't know. I believe it. I don't know it, but I just believe it. When you know it, you don't have to have faith anymore, right? It's gone. So ask questions, learn things, explore, have faith. Really.
I actually love the fact that you brought that up. We spoke about that a little while ago. It's like belief is the concept of faith without, faith is belief without knowing. Exactly what you were just saying.
Yeah, but I think too many people in Christianity are like, well, I know. Well, then you don't have any faith, so good for you. I mean, to throw it out like that, but there's like a level of we really don't know, and that's because God's bigger than we could possibly know, and so that's where faith comes in. So ask questions and learn more. There's plenty of God out there.
Question: while we're discussing books, I guess that's the overall topic of this discussion here. Do you have any particular genre that you're a fan of, Tim?
You say again, it broke up a little bit.
Do you have any particular genre you're a fan of? I know when we had a brief conversation about just fielding this discussion to see if you were interested in doing it, you had mentioned Lord of the Rings. So are you a fantasy, science fiction type kind of guy?
Yeah, man, I love sci-fi. I think sci-fi can communicate so well, like when it's really well done. So, things from like Lord of the Rings, but then C.S. Lewis has one called The Great Divorce that I love, and there's one called I can't think of the name of it right now. It's really gonna drive me nuts. Something about sparrows, but the way they communicate.
The sparrows watching.
No. I'll come up with it. I'll come up with it later. It'll just pop up. But it's about going to a different planet and seeing how these other species live and how they interact. And so it becomes a question of morality. Why are our morals the way they are versus their morals the way they are? And who's right and who's wrong? And it brings in deep conversations about life. And I think it attacks it from a different angle, so you're like open to it. The way the story draws you in. I like sci-fi like that.
Yeah, fiction is a certain way of doing that. It's kind of very similar to the X-Men animated series back in the 90s. How, for example, when the X-Men were first drafted up by Stan Lee, they were an attempt to attack racism and explain differences. And you saw like the persecution of the mutants was akin to the civil rights movement, which was really brilliant. And like just by looking at the X-Men, yeah, it was very attractive from a child's perspective. You like to see Wolverine flash his claws and cut people up, and you like to see Juggernaut running through people and all that. But it's something about the fact that it was fictional that illustrated those real world concepts in a way that children could understand them, and then adults could enjoy it as well. And I think that by it being in a fictional universe, it resonates with people so much better because they're able to abstract themselves away from it and not be as judgmental. Same thing with Star Trek.
Yeah, I agree completely, because you would say, and you probably can't owe this completely to X-Men, but you could say this generation, every generation is more tolerant, inclusive, whatever you want to call for those words, but a lot of those things have played such a role in it, and you don't even know, like you didn't know that that's where it came from, right? I grew up on the X-Men, and hearing you say that, yeah, like I can totally read that. I didn't know that about Stan Lee. I didn't know that about how the X-Men started, but I can totally see that about accepting people who are different from you and understanding their lives. And beautiful.
Yeah, fiction is powerful. Do you guys read fiction? Des, Josh, Lamar, any favorite fiction titles?
I don't read fiction books. No, can't do that.
Nah, it's been a while. I used to be a really big fan of fiction books, like at the end of high school, or throughout high school, but not no more. Because I've always had a very, very strong imagination, and fiction books, they fed into that. But I think as I kind of got older and had more real life experiences, I strayed away from it.
Josh, were you about to
Yeah, I do. I still read fiction books. It's like certain type of books. Like I don't know if you probably have like the Bluefer series books. Like I read those books too, just to get like a type of just a story, and it doesn't really remind me of stuff like in high school, but it kind of gets me back in that mood too. Like, oh wow, this is, it might not happen in my high school, but this probably happened somewhere, and it's kind of wild. So that's really the only like fiction books I really read. Other than that, not really, no.
Lamar, you answered very quickly and very strongly. So why'd you say that you can't read fiction?
Because the way I read books, I utilize reading books to grasp information. So I won't read it for pleasure. I'm not like too much on the pleasure type of guy. It's learning.
I see. I was really big into reading fiction books. Like growing up, I had this thing where I would walk around. So my parents would take us to the mall just about every weekend in Richmond or Fredericksburg, and I would go to Barnes and Nobles and get a book, and I would walk around the mall and read the book. And by the time we had left the mall, I had finished or completed the book. And these weren't like the Harry Potter series, but these were still pretty decent books. It started off with Captain Underpants and then worked its way up. But like some of my favorite childhood series, like that one was when I was really young. I read all of those. And then there's a series called The Edge Chronicles, which is by an author based out of the UK that I really wish was made into a movie. But they were just super fascinating. The books are about this thick. And I would just mow through them. I think there were 8, and recently I went back and started listening to them on audiobooks just because, for me, it reminds me of a simpler place in life, and it's also very relaxing. Just like how complex that book was for something that was meant to be like a teenage or I guess quote unquote children's literature, very similar to like the Harry Potter series or anything like this. It's like the same caliber of book. And I just enjoyed reading it. So just a trip of nostalgia. I went back and started listening to that, and I still enjoy it to this day.
Is there anything else you guys want to add? Des? Tim, Lamar?
I'm good, man. I mean, I could talk you up all night, but
Gotcha. I'm good.
Gotcha. Des, you got an album of the week or a book of the week for us?
Nah, I figured since we're going to be bringing in some pretty good titles, I think our books of the weeks could be any of the 4 or 5 that we mentioned today. Pick your poison.
Can we get an album?
Nah.
Come on, man.
I didn't come in with expectation of an album. I mean, I've been this week was like a workout week, so I've just been playing my workout playlist. I haven't really been. Nas kind of how I said in the podcast today. It's like I get to a point, man, to where I just like digest too much information. So there'd be a time like I listened to Nas's album last week. That was my album of the week. I had to digest everything. So then I take a break from music. I'll strictly listen to my playlist, and I'll put my attention to somewhere else. Then when I have a thirst for music again, I'll find a new album to listen to. And sometimes that thirst might not come back for like 2 or 3 weeks, but I've just like really hit a point in my life to where I only gravitate towards certain pleasures when it's organic. Like I just find myself wanting to do it rather than like, oh yeah, let's go listen to music or something. Like, nah, it's just whenever I catch myself in the act, then that's when I document it mentally.
Okay. Gotcha. I was about to ask if anybody else would have an album of the week. But
Tim, Lamar, you guys got an album of the week? Just whatever you got in your heart, whatever you're feeling.
There's a band that I've been listening to for 20 years, and actually I got their newest album. It's old now, but it was new to me I think a few months ago. But the band's called Thrice, and the new album is called Palms. And I've always loved them because they got great music for my ears, but they're also very their message isn't. I don't say like politically active, but in a lot of ways it's very politically active. It's very it critiques a lot of the norms that we have, critiques the way we see each other in the world and how we interact. And so I've been jamming to that actually quite a bit lately. But they also say that like once you get to a certain point in your life, you just stop listening to new music. and they say that's around 35, and I'm finding that to be very true. So now I dabble a little bit, but I've also been just sticking with the tried and true lately.
Gotcha. Right. Well, yeah, thank you guys for coming on the actual podcast. We really appreciate it. Okay.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tim, for joining us for the first time, and thanks once again, Lamar.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
If you guys like the discussion, don't forget to hit the like button, and we're gonna see you guys next week. Peace.
Oh, hey, I didn't even see you there. But while you're here, be sure to check out other great content from the Breakdown crew, including previous episodes of the podcast, Joshua versus Movies, Joshua versus Music, and of course, haven't forgotten about my plant lovers, Feel the Love. Just check out this begonia.